Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be showing you one of my favorite sourdough cinnamon roll recipes. Keep in mind, this is sugar-free, so if you're looking for a healthy treat, this is a really great one. Eaten in moderation, of course. So I'm going to show you all the steps and things that I do to make this recipe. Hey guys, since this is the Christmas holiday season, I thought I would show you my favorite sourdough cinnamon rolls. I'm going to start off, this is Friday, and so I need to feed my starter before I can make them. So right now, here's my starter. There's just a tiny little bit in here, so I need to pour off. There's some hooch. Do you see that in there in the bottom? Don't want to spill it out. There's just a little bit of liquid, so I'm going to pour that off, and I'll show you how I feed it. This is going to be at least a 2-day process, so it's something you'd want to start in advance. I took my sourdough starter and scooped it all into the bowl. I ended up keeping the hooch, as you can see. There's some liquid when I pour it out. And I decided it was time to refresh my starter. As you can see, I only had about a tablespoon left. After pouring all of the starter into my bowl, I added some lukewarm temperature water just to warm it up. I keep my starter in the fridge, so it's on the cold side and it's moving pretty slow, so this way it would get it going a little bit faster. Then I mixed it into the water, just stirred it around until there were no clumps or large sections of starter. Basically just trying to dissolve it into the water. Once it was mixed in, then I added about a half a cup of flour. Somehow I missed capturing the shot of that, but I added flour till it was about a pancake consistency and then closed it up. 6 hours later. Because I wanted my starters to be very vibrant and work really well with this sourdough bread, or I wanted it to work really well, have a good rise, I needed to feed it at least a couple times before I could use it. So this was the second feeding. And it was about 6 hours apart, as I said earlier. If your starter had been fed recently, then you wouldn't need to feed it as often, but like I said, mine needed some refreshing. As I add the water and flour each time, I just try to keep in mind the amount of volume I'm going to need. So I knew I was only going to feed it a couple times, and so then because of that, I only needed to add maybe half a cup or a cup of water at a time. I didn't want a massive amount of starter. This way, you do not have to deal with discard, especially if your starter is mature. The next morning, instead of feeding it, I decided the starter was ready to use. So I got some cold water and then warmed up some water on the stove, just so it was lukewarm once again. I didn't want to shock my starter or hurt it by just doing the boiling water or something. So to the water, I took my freshly fed starter and added that to it. At this point, I was reminded, thankfully, that I needed to save some starter to put back in the fridge. This is what I'm going to use for future recipes. This is starter I have been using for the past 2 years or so. So far I haven't made the mistake of using it all up. One time I almost did, but thankfully I've been able to save a little bit each time. And then that starter I just feed, add water and flour to, and then I bulk it up as needed for each recipe. I'm curious, out of those of you guys watching, do you do sourdough? Have you made it before? Is it something you're interested in? Let me know in the comments. I know it's something that's more recent for a lot of people. For me, it is recent too. It's been about 2 years since I started working with sourdough, and it's amazing how once you jump into the sourdough world, how it's actually not that hard. At this point, I decided it was time to put the bowl back on the machine, get the get the attachment ready, and then I added my softened butter to that. So one thing that Glenda often calls for in her recipes, her bread recipes, are vital wheat gluten, and that really helps with the rise in the texture of the dough. So that's something that I recommend if you do a lot of baking with bread or sourdough. That's a great ingredient to have on hand. I like to buy it bulk off of Amazon, and then it lasts me a good 6 months. Since this is a dessert type dough, I added some vanilla extract. And then it was time to start adding some flour. Now for this to be on plan with Trim Healthy Mama, you're not going to want to do more than 30% white flour if you are going to add white flour at all. I had some hard white ground flour, so I used that, and then I did add a portion of white flour. At this point, you're just wanting to mix the dough so that it gets to a tacky consistency. This is also a great time to add some yeast, as it calls for in the recipe. I basically just kept adding flour little bits at a time, just so that it could mix in and I wouldn't go overboard with the flour. I think that's the worst thing, is adding too much and then the dough becoming incredibly dry, so that's just something to watch for. Okay, so I should have checked my flour. I realized I ran out of flour, so I have to grind some up real quick before I can keep going. So I pulled out my KitchenAid grinder. I don't use it very often. I just used it for the first time. I just used it for the first time the other day, and it worked really well. The only downside is it can't handle a lot. So you can probably do maybe 4 cups max, 2 to 4 cups of grain before the motor starts getting really hot on the KitchenAid. So I just did enough to last me a little bit and to be able to finish the recipe. Once it was finished grinding, then I reassembled everything and got the dough back under the machine. My goal at this point was basically just to get enough flour into where the dough became tacky and kind of sticky. Let it sit for about 20 minutes or so. Once it has sat for 20 minutes, then you can add your salt and start mixing. Then you will mix it for about 5 to 6 minutes. If you're concerned about the dough being too heavy for your machine like mine, I know my machine handles one batch pretty good, but say if I'm making a batch of like 4 loaves of bread, 5 loaves of bread, that definitely starts to make the machine really hot. But you can always take it out, and for maybe half the time you could knead it by hand if you were so inclined. For the rising portion, I just took a bowl and coated it with some olive oil because that's what I had on hand. And then once I got the attachment off, you could see it was kind of stuck, or maybe it was user error. Anyways, I took the dough, put it in there, and just turned it to coat because I wanted all of the sides of the dough to have some oil on it to keep it from forming a skin. Then I covered it and put it in the warmest part of our house, which happened to be over by the piano. I decided, because I want the cinnamon rolls to be ready sooner to bake, instead of doing the fridge ferment, I am doing the countertop ferment. So I have the heat a little warmer today in the house because I want to make sure they rise really well. So I have them out rising. I'm gonna let them sit out there for, let's see what time is it? 1, 2, 3. So from when you start it to when you are done letting it rise, it should be a total of 7 hours till you bake it. So in about 5 hours or so, I'm gonna check it and I should be able to roll it out. It may be sooner depending on how well it's rising, we'll see. And then after that I'm gonna we'll put our topping on it, whatever, you know, do all the cinnamon roll stuff, roll it out, let it rise again, and then bake it. So I'm off to go do Saturday-ish things, clean the house, I guess. Okay, it's been at least 5 hours. I punched down the dough about halfway through, so this is what it looks like right now. Let's go ahead and roll it out. After rolling it out, I took the butter and melted it along with... Are you so talkative? Yeah. Yeah. While I'm editing this video, I just got my little girl up from her nap, so you may hear her cooing in the background. But I added my stevia to the melted butter. Like I was saying earlier, I wanted the molasses to fully mix in with the butter and stuff, so I figured the best way to do that was to just melt it in the butter. Then I added my extracts to that and mixed it all up and spread it all over the dough. I followed this by sprinkling the cinnamon all over it. And the sweetener I put on the top was an erythritol and allulose type sweetener, and it worked out pretty good. You just don't want to use xylitol, as that can make the dough weepy, as they say, just because of the type of sweetener it is. And then I went and rolled it all up. These cinnamon rolls are perfect to have on hand during the winter or even during the summer when you want good hearty snacks. I know after I had both of my babies, I had cinnamon rolls on hand. I had frozen ahead of time because they were really great for afternoon snacks, especially when you're trying to establish your milk supply. They're really great because they're a crossover, so they're full of fats and carbs, which is super beneficial to milk supply. for about 2 hours or so until they're nice and puffy. I'm going to cover them with saran wrap so that way they don't dry out in the process. It's been about an hour and a half to 2 hours since I covered the rolls. So let me show you what they look like, and then we're going to throw them into the oven. As you can see, they rose beautifully. I popped them in the oven for the period of time that the recipe called for. Once that was done, then I took the butter and I had pulled frozen butter out of the freezer because I like to keep my extra butter in the freezer, and I put it on the stove, so some of it had kind of melted because it got a little too warm from the rolls being in the oven. So once I cleaned that up, I threw that in the pot and just basically kept it on medium. I would stir it every once in a while, but you gotta watch it because you don't want it to burn. This is not supposed to be burnt butter, this is supposed to be brown butter. Once it got super bubbly and foamy, I knew I was getting really, really close, and it was shortly after that that it was done. So now that the butter is browned, I just need to let it cool, and then I will be able to, once it's cooled, I'll be able to mix it up with the heavy cream and cream cheese. We had decided we were going to take these to some friend's house, so the next day I wanted the rolls to be freshly frosted when we took them. So I mixed up the frosting that day. I took some softened cream cheese and then the browned butter. It was firm at this point. I mixed that in with the cream cheese and then the extract, sweetener, and that kind of thing, and just whipped that up with my beaters. Once I felt like it was all mixed in well enough, then I added the whipping cream. Because my bowl wasn't super big and I didn't want to make a complete mess, I did do it in about maybe half portions at a time just to slowly get it all mixed in. And then once I felt like it was whipped to a good consistency, that's when I took it and spread it all over the rolls. You can see my little guy, he heard me turn the beaters off and he came checking to see if he could get one of the beaters. Did any of you guys grow up licking the beaters after someone in the kitchen was making a dessert or something sweet? Let me know if you think you're going to try this recipe. I'd be super curious to hear what you think of it, and I hope it turns out as well for you as it did this time. It doesn't always turn out awesome, but one thing to keep in mind is that these recipes will vary based on where you live, the temperature, the weather, your location, how far you are above sea level, all of that. So just keep that in mind. huge thank you to Glenda for sharing this recipe, making it free online, and I hope that maybe you'll give it a try. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with me, and let me know if any of you guys made this recipe. I realize it's kind of close to Christmas, but if you had your sourdough starter already fed, then it shouldn't be too hard. I'll link the recipe in the description, and thanks for coming by. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and for joining us as we share recipes and different household related content. Hope you guys have a great day.